My name is Blair Williams, and I'm here today at Second Pres, here to interview Pastor Jeff. So thank you for agreeing to do the interview.
I'm glad that you could come here. This is a great congregation, and I've been part of it for 11 years now. So.
Well, if I could just ask you to introduce yourself.
My name is Jeff Gibelius. You probably call me the senior pastor here, the lead pastor at different times. Most of the time we have two pastors. Right now we have a vacancy. I came here in 2007 in the summertime, started early September.
All right, Pastor Jeff, focus a little bit early on here on your background. So where were you born and raised?
I grew up in Ballston Lake, New York, which is sort of between Schenectady and Saratoga, New York, in upstate New York, about 3 hours north of New York City, kind of near Albany.
Yeah.
And I grew up in a Lutheran Church and had a great experience there. And it was when I went to seminary in Manhattan at Union Seminary in New York City that I decided, well, I need to get some field education experience. And so I was looking for internships, and the only one that was available was a Presbyterian one. And I thought, well, why not? I'll give it a try just to see what that's like. And it was a great congregation, and they welcomed me with open arms. And over the next couple of years, I realized, gosh, this is really a good fit for me.
I was going to say, I grew up near Boston, in Manchester, Vermont.
All right, yeah.
And I know there's not too many Presbyterian churches up in our neck of
Right,
the woods.
right.
So, yeah, it's interesting that how you came to the Presbyterian Church then.
It's been a very good fit, and I'm one of those people, I think, because I had a good experience with my Lutheran background and my family is still Lutheran, that I've learned to really appreciate different denominations and how each one brings a slightly different emphasis to looking at Jesus, and that's what I really enjoy. And I'm glad there's lots of different denominations. I think we need them so that everybody really finds that they've got a place where they fit.
Well, you mentioned that you had this good experience growing up in Ballston Spa and in the Lutheran Church. What are some of your early memories of the church then?
Some of them, especially if you think about the Lutheran tradition, relate to worship. Candlelight, Christmas Eve services. The Lutheran liturgy itself is one that repeats weekly, and most of it is sung. So it's summertime right now, and I can remember mowing the lawn, singing the Lutheran liturgy while I mowed it. I mean, because it just became part of it, and you kind of would just hum it as you go. And I had a very good relationship with my pastor growing up. He saw potential in me that I didn't necessarily see myself at the time, but he got me visiting shut-ins, assisting in worship, doing lots of things like that at an early age while I was still in high school. I was glad for that. It really did shape me.
Did church play an active role in your family's sort of social life, or?
I wouldn't say. It's interesting. It played a big part in our family's life. It was pretty much a Sunday institution, but it's not like we socialized with the church that much. Some of my church friends ended up being my closest friends, and we all did go to the same school. So in that, for me, it was that way, and to some extent for my sister too. But it's not like we got together with other church families for vacation or things like that. But certainly when we were at church together, we really felt like a community.
And you mentioned you went to Union Seminary. How did you end up at Union?
All right. After graduating from Burnt Hills Ballston Lake High School, I was a Spartan there. I went to Colgate in Hamilton, New York. And Colgate, small liberal arts school in a rural part of America, in some ways not too different from Dickinson, but even more rural. And when I was graduating from Colgate, I had a choice to make. I had always been interested in law and politics, and that's really was my first love. But I'd also been very active on campus with the campus ministry there, and I started thinking maybe there's something else too. I'd been interning in a law office and had seen a lot of that. So I was really torn. and my plan was I'd apply to law schools, apply to seminaries, see what happened. Well, the good news is I got scholarships, and so I went to law school for a year at Albany Law School, and then literally on the last day of school, I found out I made law review just a couple days earlier. I said, I'm leaving. I'm going to seminary. And my classmates like, what? You know, I'd never shared that side of me with them, and you know, we didn't really talk about that. And then I went to seminary, and I wanted to go to Union because it was in Manhattan. It was in the big city. I'd never experienced that, and also because it was an interfaith and interdenominational seminary. There are people from lots of different backgrounds there, mostly Christian, of course, but some non-Christians, certainly Catholics and Protestants. And I thought this will be a good place for me to really be exposed to many different ideas and that would challenge my faith. Union at the time, and still today, was known as a very progressive seminary on the cutting edge of theology in many ways. And I thought, well, this would be a real contrast to my upbringing to that point. And it really was. And I enjoyed being in New York City. It was a great experience for those 3 years.
So you went to law school for 1, but then you stuck around at seminary for 3 years.
Yep.
So, I mean, at that point, after being at seminary, was your mind pretty much set then on?
It really was. The difference for me was when I started that internship, I realized I really enjoyed working with young people, visiting older people, preaching and leading worship, designing classes, teaching, going on youth lock-ins and being able to do all of that. I'd already been working, as I mentioned, in an internship in a small town law office, which is probably where I would have ended up. And there was lots of interesting things about that, but it couldn't compare to helping people grow in faith and the variety and the challenge. I really felt personally challenged. I felt like I was personally growing, and I felt like my gifts were a good fit there.
You mentioned earlier that back in high school at the Lutheran Church, you were beginning to be exposed to visiting shut-ins and being more engaged in the church. Was your internship sort of an extension of that, or?
It really was. If you think about it, my first experience in doing ministry was there was a county home, county nursing home, and at that time it would have been the mid-70s. A lot of these county homes were underfunded, and they were not pleasant places to be a resident or to visit even. I remember the mostly able-bodied men were in giant dorms, would have 30 or 40 beds in one giant room, open air, and it just never smelled good. I mean, it was just, it was really unfortunate. Today's standards have improved so much for care. But we had a Sunday afternoon worship service that our congregation, Lutheran congregation, led, and my job and the other kids really was to wheel patients to that worship service. And I don't remember any worship service itself, like what happened during that time. I don't think I was paying attention at all. But the most meaningful part for me was bring the patients down and bring them back. And we'd kind of talk along the way. I developed a friendship with one of the patients, the first 90-year-old that I'd ever met. Stephen Jungle was his name, and it helped me understand how important it was that we care for each other. And that experience, as probably a third or fourth grader, was essentially what I ended up doing in college while I was studying law and studying history. I was a history and economics major. I also led worship services at the local nursing home. It was an extension of the hospital, and me and a couple other students, we were just kind of making it up. No one authorized us to do it. We didn't, there was no rules or anything. We just kind of led it each week. And then when I finally got to an official internship, then it was leading the youth group, preaching maybe once a month, leading some prayers on Sundays. And I've still saved some of those early manuscripts and everything, because it took a lot of time to prepare those, and I was glad for that.
So you you do this internship at a Presbyterian church.
Yep.
While at Union. What happened after you graduated and left?
All right. The internship was at Deer Park, Long Island, and when I graduated from Union, I was switching between the Lutheran Church, where I'd grown up, and the Presbyterian Church. I knew I wanted to move in the Presbyterian direction, but to do that, I had to first join a Presbyterian church officially and get into the Presbyterian ordination process. So I took an internship, a full-time 2-year internship at West Hampton Presbyterian Church, and also on Long Island, and knowing that that would give me the time to complete my ordination requirements in the Presbyterian Church. So I actually joined the West Hampton Presbyterian Church. That's the first Presbyterian church that I belonged to, and it was out of that church that I began the ordination process.
What does that process involve?
Well, there's 2 tracks. One is the educational track, and that I had pretty much completed in seminary. I had completed all the necessary studies, Greek and Hebrew, Bible content examinations. There's polity exams, theology exams. I'd completed most of that, but what was still left was meeting with the Committee on Preparation for Ministry in that presbytery, the Presbytery of Long Island, to have them get to know me a little bit, for me to assure them that I understood what the Presbyterian Church was all about. And at the time, there were some time requirements built in. You had to stay at each phase or stage of preparation a certain amount of time to help sort out who's really ready for this. They don't want people to impulsively decide that they'd like to become a pastor. So it took all those steps, and then the last step was to receive a call. That in the Presbyterian Church, before you're ordained, someone has to actually call you to a position. We don't want people to be ordained with no ministry out there, you might say. And so I was called to First Presbyterian Church in Caldwell, New Jersey, and as an associate pastor there. So by that point, everything was in place. I'd finished my ordination exams, I'd completed all my educational requirements, and I had a call. So I was ready to go.
When was this that you were finally ordained?
In January of 1993.
Okay. And then, so you were an associate pastor to start with, and then eventually you made your way to Carlisle.
Yes.
At Second Pres.
Yep.
I'm wondering, how did Carlisle or how did Second Pres find you? And
well, I stayed in Caldwell for 8 years and had a great experience there. It was the perfect fit for me at that time. There was lots of turnover in that congregation, so I got to try lots of different things and preached pretty regularly. Got to really do a lot as an associate pastor. Then my first solo call, if you will, was at Pluckerman Presbyterian Church, also in New Jersey, kind of near Bridgewater, New Jersey. And there, some great things happened. I was able to pull out some of the tricks that I never got to use at Caldwell. Do some things, certainly leading worship every week, some capital campaigns, renovations. We had some wonderful new member classes, just great things were happening there. And after about 7 years in that congregation, all the change and the growth and the good things that were happening in itself created some resistance. It turns out that not everybody in a formerly small church really wants to see the church grow and thrive in some creative ways. And so at that point I realized, with my wife's assistance, that, the best thing for us and for our family, at this point, we've been here 7 years, we've got some small kids, maybe it's time to go to another place where we can really stay long term. And so I started looking for a congregation in a community that seemed really healthy for families, congregation that was open to change and growth and vital ministry. And about halfway through my process, I saw that Second was looking, and it turns out, I didn't know this at the time, but that was very early in their process. So it took some time for them to have a chance to interview other candidates, and it took me being patient, and then eventually over the summer of, probably spring of 2007, we realized, hey, this is a match with a lot of potential.
Well, so eventually you were brought on.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, sort of, what were your first memories of Second Presbyterian?
One of them was when I was unpacking, and I was eager, of course, to get started, and I had a ton of boxes of books, way too many books, and two guys, Jack Larson and Bill Galbraith, met me some late one evening. I'm not sure I'd even arranged to meet them. I think they just sort of came by. And Jack and Bill were great friends, and I didn't know either of them. At the time, they were both pushing 80, maybe at least 75. And what I didn't know was what kind of jokesters they were, punsters, both of them. And so we're all three unpacking books, and they're just joking back and forth. And I think it gave me a good sense very early on that this was going to be a place of warmth, of caring. It meant a lot that Jack, who had been a pastor here at that point, he probably had left 15 years earlier, that he still wanted to participate in the life of the church. That it meant a lot to him, and that he would really humble himself. Here's a really experienced pastor helping me unload my books and everything. And to see the warmth that he felt for Bill was really wonderful.
What was the sort of that first Sunday like here at Second Pres?
I don't even remember it.
Really?
Yeah, I'd like to say that I did, but I think what I want to say is one of the things I remember in the fall was relief. The move process was difficult. As I kind of hinted at, toward the end of times in New Jersey, it wasn't easy. It was really frustrating, and I had some wounds from that experience. And what I mainly remember is that, as I say, is that sense of relief. The staff was very welcoming, ready to have me on board, and I was so grateful for that.
As the lead pastor, sort of, what would you say your role is here at Second Presbyterian?
I think my operating metaphor, and I probably have some other ones too, but the one that just seems to be behind most of my approach to things is I feel a little bit like Moses, in the sense of being asked to help people get from one place to another, and recognizing that if you think of Moses, everybody wanted to get out of Egypt, but they weren't too pleased with being in the desert. They were excited about the promised land, but they couldn't see it, they couldn't taste it, they couldn't feel it. All they knew was they were hungry. And that maybe it'd be easier to go back, or it's just hard work continuing to move forward. And I think I see my task sometimes as helping to cast a vision to say, God really is calling us to deeper relationships with God, deeper relationships with our community and with each other. And that promised land, that metaphorical promised land, is worth seeking. But it's hard work. And we get wounded along the way. There are battles to be fought. We get hungry and thirsty. And these are all the things that the Israelites experienced. And Moses had to encourage people through that. And sometimes he just plain got discouraged. So if you ask me, what do I see as my role, is There's an element certainly of vision casting, wayfinding and navigating, helping people see that there is a way to get from here to there. There's a time of reminding people that we're all following God. It's not up to me or my plan, that together we're following God. So it's an element of all those things at once.
You mentioned that you were, coming, from New Jersey, and seeing the staff, that they were all excited to have you here. And I'm wondering, who are some of the people on staff that have stood out to you over the years that you've worked with?
Boy, one of the things that I most appreciate here is the friendships within the staff, and friendship isn't quite the right word, because it's not like we do a lot of socializing outside of this, but the teamwork and the respect for each other, and that has been consistent throughout, and it's also rare. I've worked in some great congregations, and none of them had this kind of staff culture. It was here before I got here, and I pray it'll be here long after I leave. But I feel that part of my responsibility is being a steward of that. So Pastor Jennifer McKenna, she came to this church initially when she was in high school and made some great friends. She and her parents and her whole family attended this service, this congregation. And then years later, when she was ordained, she got called here to be an associate pastor. And she was a very good fit for my gifts and interests, strong in pastoral care, strong heart for mission and reaching out, especially to justice issues and so on. And so she was a great partner in ministry. Vicki Lance, Deb Brandberg have both been here as long as I have. So there's a depth of experience when you've worked 10, 11, 12 years with different people. And we're benefiting from that. And some of the new staffers have made great contributions in a relatively short time too. Destiny Frisky, Chris Prestia are both on the staff now. Gracie Payne has come in and out at different times as she's getting ready to be a pastor herself. And they've all had a freshness and a vision. I just feel so pleased. Our treasurers have turned over. David Price was here for the longest amount of time, and he too brought a steadiness, a flexibility that was such a joy to work with.
Now, what about working with some of the different committees, or how much, or do you kind of just let them do their thing?
Well, no, I work. Other staff probably work more closely with individual committees. My task, especially in the last few years, has been to help the committees navigate an enormous amount of transition. In the last few years, we went from having 3 boards, trustees, having 15 people on it, session 18, and the deacons about 30, to having 2 boards. We merged the trustees and session, or elders, into one board of 18, and the deacons are now at maybe in the mid-20s, I think. Well, I'll have to check that. But that has been a response to changing approaches to volunteering and fewer people feeling like they have the leadership gifts necessary to chair a committee. So we combined the boards, but then also in the next phase had to combine committees and give people new assignments and think about what's the best way to do ministry here. So that has been the task for the last couple years, is what is the best organizational structure to help us move forward and to help us really keep focused. A few years ago, we began a visioning process where we realized as a congregation we couldn't do everything we wanted to do. There's just too many possible things. So we began to think, what's really important to us? What do we really feel called to do? And what we came up with was less a specific vision of where we want to go than a vision of how we will get there, which may not make a lot of sense, but we realized we're not going to get anywhere unless we focus. And so that means we take a hard look at what is our calling, what is not our calling. And it may well be a good thing, but it might be some other congregations or a nonprofit task to pursue that particular project. So focus has been a big part of things. We also decided that we've got to stop trusting just our own resources, financial, energy, vision, and we need to rely on God a whole lot more. And the metaphor for that is sailing. So we decided we're going to be a focused congregation. We're going to be a congregation that sails, that takes risks, that says, God, we trust you. If you give us the destination, you'll also give us the power to get there. We decided we need to start thinking forward. We've been too short-term in our thinking. We need to plan now for our finances 20 and 30 years from now. We need to plan now for leaders 20 and 30 years from now. So how are we going to develop those leaders of tomorrow? We need to move outward. If you look at our building from the outside, it's a wonderful building, and I really love it. It has shaped us, but it can look a little bit like a fortress. It's all brick and thick walls, and inside we feel very safe. But God ultimately wants us to move out of the sanctuary, out of that safe place, into out into those places where God's people are. So by moving outward, we're talking about literally moving ministries off-site. Instead of having a Bible study here, maybe we'll do it at Cumberland Crossings. Instead of we're contemplating moving one of our major children's ministries to Project Share or Hope Station, so that we can reach an entirely different community of people. Then we're also talking about the last shift is expecting transformation. Is congregations like this can tend to just be happy with doing things the way we've always done them, with just keeping everybody comfortable. And if we look at the gospel, that's not what the gospel invites us to. The way I put it is, God doesn't want us to be better better caterpillars. God wants us to be butterflies. And that requires transformation and life change. And so our goal here isn't just to make people more comfortable and help them get through the week. Sometimes that's an admirable goal, but it's not just that. It's ultimately to lead to life change, a closer relationship with God, and where it shows up in our behavior and our values and attitudes. So I can't tell you where I think we'll be 20 years from now. I can tell you what it takes to get there, and it's to sail, to focus, to move outward, to think forward, and to expect transformation. If we do that, wherever we end up is going to be the promised land.
I'm just thinking back to a couple conversations I had, in particular, one with Betty Gardner and Betsy Wood, sort of talking about their own transition from being a member to being a leader and the elders and all that. And I guess that must be a continual process though for the church, finding and identifying those people and then.
Sure, it's interesting. Moses himself had to face the leadership issue. In his case, people were bringing everything to him, and he had to learn to delegate responsibility, to trust others, and so on. And that was a real challenge for him. In my case, I think, and I think it applies to many areas of life today, the issue is helping people understand the calling to leadership, the joys of leadership, and that it's worth their while. It's easier today for people to say no to certain volunteer opportunities and commitments than perhaps in my parents' generation, when volunteering for many folks then was just part of what you did. And these days there's not necessarily that same approach. And so pastors have to be much more intentional about finding the next Betsy Woods, the next Betty Gardners, the next Bill Galbraiths and Jack Larsons, and nurturing them now.
Well, I'm wondering, during this visioning process and sort of this transformational step in terms of consolidating and committees and leadership positions, and is there anyone that you've worked with closely that's stood out to you in terms of their involvement in this process?
Maybe this is true. Maybe this is a good point for a second, in that this is a congregation with many strong leaders, lay leaders, but I don't know that I would say any dominant lay leaders. Certainly, there are some folks that really stand out because of their past involvement, but they don't dominate the congregation in the way that sometimes pillars of the church can in a congregation. What I'm most grateful for was feeling the support of the session to say, Jeff, what do you think we should do? Mm-hmm. And let's make that happen. It's not like they rubber stamped it, but they really said, okay, you're in a position to see some things that we can't see. Give us a sense of that, and we'll say, yeah, we think it fits or it doesn't. And there was some frank conversation along the way, and we got to a really good place where we've honed in on these particular shifts, we call them. And I'm struck at how many people played a part in saying, yeah, we need to keep changing, we need to keep evolving, even for a congregation as old as we are.
Well, you also mentioned sort of, moving ministries off-site and sort of reaching new people. And a few people that I've talked with have also, mentioned, various initiatives, I think, in particular, and you mentioned as well, sort of being more involved with Hope Station, and I know May, the homeless community shelters at Second Presbyterian. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more sort of about those community initiatives.
Sure. They came about from different ways of thinking. Mm-hmm. One was a few years ago. Pastors are often encouraging their congregations to do more with, quote, the poor, people in need. And it struck me when I suddenly realized we as a congregation don't have to go out and find people in need. For an entire month a year, they come and live with us. Like, we have people right here in our building who call Second Pres their home for a month. And I thought, let's do things with them. And it was out of that some amazing things grew. Bill Spruill and Lillian Wong have done dental exams. Paula Hollowell and her friends have done haircuts for people. Robin Strobel was here the other night baking cookies with them. We did a funeral or memorial service for a man in cares who died last year. And we've done concerts together, we've had barbecues together, and it's been wonderful making that connection. And that comes from this idea that Jesus said, at least for me, if Jesus said, when you did it to these, you did it unto me. And I hate to say when you did it to the least of these, because people who are in need, they're not the least at all. They're the first in the kingdom of God. And so when we visit with them, it's just been a joy to realize what they have to offer, the friendship, the openness to my story, to talking. So I've really enjoyed that, and I think it continues to make us stronger as a congregation. Our initiative with Hope Station is part of a bigger question or bigger issue that we call One Carlisle. And that came from a realization with Pastor Jennifer a couple of years ago, where we realized this was when Baltimore was rioting, and Freddie Gray had just died in police custody, and I began thinking, could that happen here in Carlisle? I knew there were different neighborhoods that were pretty well segregated by class and color, and I also knew that I didn't know those neighborhoods. I didn't even know a pastor in the African American community that I could call to say, hey, how's it going? Can we help? Can we be part of a vigil together or something like that? I realized how ill-equipped I was. And so Pastor Jennifer took some initiative to get black and white clergy together. And you may think, like, we're past that time, but no, we actually have 2 different clergy associations in Carlisle. And Jennifer decided, no, that we've got to bring pastors from both backgrounds together. And she did that. And that was a starting point. Going to Hope Station was an easy way for us to say, hey, we can just start at a kid level, get kids playing together. So for the past couple of years, we've brought ice cream and had hot dogs and done different things there. And we don't have a plan, to say you do this step and you do this, but we're trying to let that relationship grow organically. And by the people at Hope Station can invite us to different events to support them. Likewise, we're trying to say, hey, we hope you'll be part of what we're doing, because we're better together, we're stronger together. So we're investing in those relationships because Carlisle matters, and we think it's what Jesus would want us to be doing.
And I don't know if this is an extension of One Carlisle or a separate initiative, but I know when I spoke with Jack Larson, he mentioned being involved with the Bosnian Muslim community, and I believe they recently came and attended one service here. I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about sort of that initiative and that relationship.
Sure. It's really exciting for me to talk about these kinds of things. Bethel AME is one of our partner churches. We do a lot with Hope Station. We have a relationship with the Honduran migrant worker community in Adams County. We're going to be doing a bunch of stuff with them this summer. But along the way, we realized as anti-Muslim rhetoric and kind of Muslim suspicion was really growing in our area, we thought, again, we don't know anybody of a Muslim background. And that's a recipe for misunderstanding and violence, and just not good. So it turns out, by God's grace, years ago, we had helped a Bosnian family move into the area, kind of sponsored them and assisted them along the way. Mercida is her name. She runs a Bosnian grocery in town. And out of that, we decided we would invite Mercida and her Muslim community, all Bosnian, to come for a dinner where they would talk a little bit about the immigrant experience. What was that like? And again, we decided we'd do it over food. And Imam Jamal is a wonderful young imam. He's been very open to this. So we've exchanged invitations back and forth where they've come to worship. They helped with Carlisle Cares this past week. Likewise, Bethel AME sent volunteers as well. So we're serving God together. We're eating together. We've worshiped together. I've preached at Bethel AME. We're still trying to get Maryland to come here, but Ivy Berry and others have preached here. The imam, has come and brought his community to a Sunday morning worship service. We're going this Friday night to an iftar dinner in part of a Ramadan celebration as a way of really building understanding. We're trying to get our youth together so that they can build some cross-cultural friendships. And I think God rejoices when God sees people of different colors but shared faith together, or people even of different faiths but ultimately tracing their roots back to Abraham, as Muslims, Jews, and Christians do. I think that's got to please God in some way.
Are Are there any other initiatives that are going on that I'm just not aware of? I'm sure there are.
The biggest one, I think, is these cross-cultural initiatives. We've also hosted a meal with the Amish community, and because in this area we've got a strong Amish influence and Mennonite, and I thought it was important for us to see these folks not as simply a curiosity, but rather as living, breathing people of faith who follow God in a different way. And that's been wonderful. So I'm hoping that we're going to have a picnic this summer. And some people may discount this idea of eating together. Like, really, how much you're accomplishing. God thought a whole lot could be accomplished with bread and juice. So I'm willing to bet that a whole lot of reconciliation and community can be built over beans and pasta and hamburgers and potato salad. And it's true. I was at a meeting with Margie Ensign, the president of Dickinson College, and she, relatively new to the community, is looking out and seeing some challenges that need to be addressed in our community. And she's eager to address them and wondering how the college can help with that. And one of the things that I think is important is that before we can address the challenges out there, the challenges of racial injustice, lack of economic opportunity, housing shortages, and so on, we have to learn how to work together, how to respect each other as people, and to really build one Carlisle, to build a sense of community together. Otherwise, it's this group trying to fix that group's problems or something like that. And I don't think that's going to work. I think it risks actually building resentment. So when you say what other initiatives are going on, this is a long-term project of building these conversations and relationships that may well take a decade or more, but if we do it right, may last well into the future.
Is the One Carlisle initiative is that the biggest sort of change since you came back in 2007? Or have there been other changes involved in your, day-to-day duties that stand out to you?
If we were to look at the past now 11 years, from a historical perspective, I think one of the things historians will note is to say this was the time when Second Pres began to take seriously the fact that we live in what we call a post-Christian culture. We now recognize that we have to work harder, we have to shine brighter, we have to be more intentional to do the kinds of ministry that we were able to do pretty easily 20 years ago. And it's not because, in my opinion, that the culture's hostile. I think it's becoming largely indifferent. And some of that's on us. We haven't helped people to see how we really are relevant to their lives. We've talked a good talk about racial inequality, but have we really put ourselves out there and said, let's build those friendships? And we're doing some of that now. So I think that's a big part of it. The symbolism of consolidating the session is saying, okay, we're not going to be this large bureaucracy anymore. We can't be. So we're going to be leaner, more focused, more intentional. And I think that's one, I hope, looking back, people say, yeah, that's when we first began to really take seriously that we have a different place in society. Not a worse place in society, just different. And maybe from the margins of society, as we identify more with the voices of the voiceless, that kind of thing, we might really find our real place and find that we grow in faith even more easily, because I think that's where Jesus would be. So that is a big shift that's taking place. And for a congregation like this that has a memory within many people's lives of being, maybe 200 or 300 more people, giant Sunday school classes, as many congregations in our area. Grace Methodist would be Allison United Methodist, which is no more. Those congregations were huge, and they're not now. We're wrestling with some of that to say, okay, what does our future look like? And I'm suggesting that it will be different, but it can still be faithful.
I'm just thinking about you describing, sort of, your job and all the initiatives, and I'm wondering, what are some of the special knowledge or skills that you think that you benefit the most from having?
Me personally.
Yep. Or maybe just in general.
Yeah.
Someone who's a lead pastor at,
Well, okay. One is I really like people. I enjoy working with them. I'm happiest helping people achieve something, building something together. I love Jesus, and I came to faith not by anything I did. From the time I was a child, I just felt God's presence, and always felt a sense of call, like Jesus wanted me to do something. And that is wonderful, because that kind of gives me energy and focus. It helps me know at the end of the day that I'm not alone, you might say. I'm an interesting mix of my mom and my dad, in that my mom is a great sense of humor and is creative in her own right. She would take a blood drive, American Red Cross blood drive, and turn it into a fun event, giving out prizes and all kinds of things. She just enjoyed that, and I kind of saw that. My dad was an engineer, and like some engineers at least, he was always thinking about function. He didn't care so much about form. What that meant was he was always finding new ways to accomplish things. And I think that's left me with this helpful sense of, okay, this is how it has been. Let's think of 10 ways it could be different in the future. 8 of those ways may be kind of crazy, but 2 of them might actually work. And so that's been helpful in a time of change, where we have to be creative. We have to think differently.
Shifting gears, a little bit, I'm wondering, do you remember a time when faith played a particularly important role in your life?
Sure. A whole bunch of times.
Yeah.
I'll rattle off a couple of them, and you can help me with this. Early on, in that sense of call, I think that shaped me for sure. Even as a child, really feeling at home in the church and safe there. My dad had a pretty serious heart attack when I was in college, and that was probably one of the first times that I really relied in a serious way on God. After I graduated from seminary, I had a brief marriage, and that ended in divorce, and I did not see that coming at all. I had led in some ways, not a charmed life, but a pretty smooth life, you might say, and that really shook me. But the amazing thing was, even as I was kind of coming to understand that, okay, this is what was going to happen, the marriage was going to end, I felt an amazing calm. And I thought, oh, this is what faith feels like. This is what it feels like to have God's presence in your life. Then probably the next big time that I can think off the top of my head was when I was leaving my previous congregation and coming here, where, like I say, it was really rough. And I had to distinguish between my relationship with God's people and my relationship with God. And I never doubted my relationship with God. But it got really hard to love God's people, at least some of them, through that crisis. And so that was super hard. But I'm so grateful for how I landed here. And I'd never been to Carlisle before, so I had no ties here at all. And it's a great place, and it feels like home. And then the last one is when we finally got here, we had a couple boys, and Carrie and I were getting to the point where it's like, should we have another child? Can we at this age? And we really thought we should adopt, and we tried some international adoption routes, and those doors seemed to close pretty quickly, and for a bunch of reasons, political and age and health and other things. And so we ended up deciding, well, maybe we'll do what my sister had done, which was to foster children, and we might get to adopt. And well, sure enough, we went through the whole fostering program, and April 22nd, 2010, we got a call that there were two little girls that needed a home. One a newborn, 17 days old, and one about 6 months old. And we said, okay, we'll do this. And well, by God's grace, we were able to adopt the newborn. And we still, from time to time, keep in touch with the other, with her half-sister. And what a blessing. I just think if I ever needed proof of God's amazing grace and love and the power of prayer, it's my daughter, Allie. She's with us by God's grace and by God's design, and I'm so grateful for that.
This is a similar question, but maybe a little bit different. Just how has your faith journey influenced your life over your years?
What I'm trying to think, Blair, is it like, did my faith journey influence my life, or did my life influence my faith journey? Mm-hmm. I think it's a fair way to think of the way I've experienced my life is to say, I've been making these choices along the way to go to this school or that school. Like, I prayed about it, or to go this path. Should I go to law? Should I go into ministry and so on? And it's been along the way of doing those things that my faith has developed. It's come into play. I can't, I literally cannot imagine my life without faith. My faith has enabled me to do things, that I don't think I would have had the strength or the courage to do on my own in wonderful ways.
I think that's an interesting perspective, though, in terms of, the life choices we make also influencing, our faith in terms of how, I think that, because, I get that.
Yeah, and I think too, Blair, that God, as Presbyterians, we understand God's guiding hand, mm-hmm. but we don't think of that as God has a path lined out for us. Rather, I think God can take our choices and continue to use our choices for good, to work out God's own plan. So I think that's how I've experienced it, is like God's taken my good choices, God's taken my bad choices, and so on, and somehow worked through all of it.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that one of the reasons you came to Carlisle was because you were looking to raise your family. And I'm wondering, how has that decision turned out for you?
Great. We were in central New Jersey, which was a good place to start a marriage, to start a family, but a hard place to continue in. It's really intense there, and it's expensive, and Carlisle has been great. We're in South Middleton Township, and so we're bubblers, and the boys I think feel cared for in school, have had good opportunities along the way to build friendships and to try some different experiences. As you know, I love the congregation in this community. I feel like I'm just beginning to understand it, which is to say, like, I'm really at the beginning. Like, I would love 10 more years to be able to understand each of the individual communities even better. So it's a place that has real depth to it. The work you're doing with the Historical Society, oh my gosh, it's amazing stuff. So I'm looking forward to learning more about that. So I have a very much this sense that I'm just starting. I'm here 11 years, but there's so much more to explore and do.
All right, well, Pastor Jeff, thank you for taking the time to sit and talk to me. It's been a blast. So, thank you.
Thank you.